Card draw is the most important aspect of any commander deck. I frequently play with both new and experienced players, and one of the main differentiating factors between the two groups is how much emphasis they put on having enough resources available. Experienced players will nearly always have at least a 7-card hand. They draw so many cards that against them, a synergy-less Gef's Grimoire becomes a very reasonable card advantage engine, as players frequently discard down to hand size. However, when I'm playing against newer players, Gef's Grimoire is just 4 wasted mana, as they struggle through the game with 3 cards in hand, 2 of which are lands. Or actually, sometimes even worse, when none of their cards are lands. A lot of commander discussion focuses on which cards are strong and which strategies are powerful. Whenever a fancy new commander is released, people will start strategizing infinite combos and other shenanigans. And while I get the appeal of that, pushing the limits of the game is an engaging thought exercise, I think this kind of logic centers Commander around the wrong essence. The journey is the goal. We are here to play a game together. The most important part of a game isn't winning, but getting to play. And the key to playing is having cards in hand. Because of that, the biggest piece of deck building advice I always give new players is to include as much card draw as possible. So long as we have cards in hand, we are playing, and that's what matters. Not only does including a lot of card draw lead to a better game experience because we actually get to take actions, but card draw can also compensate for deck building mistakes. If we didn't include enough ramp, removal, lands, or whatever, we can focus on drawing cards and find them that way. However, I'm not saying we should play a pile of divinations. Commander card draw is different from what we usually see across other formats, as it needs to be sustained for a much larger number of turns. To achieve this, we want to build synergies across our deck in such a way that nearly all of our cards can replace themselves in one capacity or another. The easiest example here is Garruk's Uprising. Garruk's Uprising is a 3-mana enchantment that gives all of our creatures trample. It also draws a card if we control a creature of power 4 or more when it enters, and then again whenever such a creature enters while the enchantment is in play. If we include Garruk's Uprising in our deck, and then choose only creatures with power 4 or more for the rest of the list, then everything has the potential to become card draw. And I think this much is obvious to everybody. Garruk's Uprising is played in a huge number of decks for a good reason. It's the most exemplar card draw engine I can think of. A big reason why green is widely considered the most threatening color in casual Commander is that it has access to a lot of engine-based card draw, which stems from cards like Garruk's Uprising. Up the Beanstalk, Tribute to the World Tree, and Elemental Bond all follow the same idea, and when they accompany each other, a green player can play a 5-mana creature with power 4 or greater and draw 4 cards all at once. This is not an exhaustive list, by the way. There are a lot of green cards that behave like this. Of course, we're not just limited to playing 4-attack beaters to draw cards. We can plan the rest of our deck to make sense with our card draw engines, like using Kogla the Titan Ape as a removal spell that also draws cards, or Azorius Predation as a board wipe that makes us die to decking out. Tarkir Dragonstorm actually had a card that fits really nicely here as well, which is Dragonback Assault, a 6-mana Timur enchantment that deals 3 damage to all creatures and planeswalkers when it enters, but then also has a landfall effect that creates 4/4 tokens, which we can use to trigger Garruk's Uprising. I think this is a great card in Commander, not just because it's powerful by itself, but also because it has valuable access points for synergies. This is an important concept to understand when it comes to drawing cards in Commander. While single instances of card draw are totally fine and something we definitely want here and there, ideally we want to tie our card draw into every component of our deck. For example, if we're playing a Golgari deck with some sort of sacrifice plan, Morbid Opportunist becomes a natural fit for our deck. But then, we should double up on this by making our ramp creature-based, Ideally creatures that can sacrifice themselves, like Sakura Tribe Elder, Neverwinter Dryad, or Insidious Fungus. You can find these by combining Otak Ramp and Otak Sacrifice Self. Oftentimes you will hear content creators give advice that you should be playing the right cards for your deck, and that generic pieces aren't always the best option. This is what they mean by that. Instead of just slamming rampant growth, when building our deck, we want to identify our specific card draw engines and then choose cards that will play into those to ensure that we always have resources. If we're playing Professional Facebreaker, we want to focus on treasures, with Archmage Emeritus on instants on sorceries, and for Welcoming Vampire on Small Wieners Entering. Talking about Small Wieners Entering, if you enjoyed the video so far, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Man, that was a... Anyways, the cards I just listed are all fairly generic and very popular, which is because they work well with a large number of cards. But to me, that makes them a bit less than exciting. I'm not saying that we shouldn't play these cards, but I always like searching for alternatives that work more distinctly with my theme. A great tag here is Otak Repeatable Draw, which we can combine nicely with other synergy tags. Let's say we're playing a life gain deck, then we can couple Otak Repeatable Draw with Otak Life Gain Mattis, immediately giving us a nice overview of card draw engines that fit into a life gain theme. Maybe we can structure some parts of our deck around Drogskull Reaver or Lunar Convocation. Now, up to this point, I expect that everybody is fully on board. Building resource engines in Commander is like 80% of the format. However, I like going a step further. After I finished building my engines, I then proceed to absolutely slaver my deck in tiny pieces of card advantage. Can I show you my favorite counterspell? It's Dream Fracture. This is a 3-mana counterspell that counters a spell and then lets both us and the controller of that spell draw a card. Dream Fracture kicks ass. While it's a bit less mana efficient than other counterspells, it replacing itself makes it much easier to find an opportunity to cast it, and because it makes our opponent draw a card, we are also less likely to make an enemy. Our counterspells can often feel a bit clunky, as we hold them in hand to find the right moment to cast them, because if we don't hit that, then we're just down a card. But that's not the case for Dream Fracture, because it replaces itself. Lauren of the Third Path, Kenris Transformation, Bone Crusher Giant. These removal and control options are all less mana efficient than the fastest in class options. But because they offer some kind of card advantage, they tend to perform much better in casual social Commander. They are easier to play and lead into our next move. This is another big factor why players struggle with resources in Commander. They play cards that don't connect into our engines. Now, I'm not saying literally every card needs to connect into an engine or provide its own replacement effect. It's fine for a Beast Within to just be a generous gift. But it's important to minimize those necessities as they make us go -1 on cards. Also, did I just count Bone Crusher Giant as card draw? Well, yeah, kind of. I've just been talking about card draw in place of card advantage, as it's a bit shorter and more straightforward. However, in actuality, everything I've said applies to card advantage instead of only card draw. And card advantage, in my eyes, is literally anything that gives us a card to play. Helpful Hunter enters and draws us a card. Undead Butler dies and returns a creature from our graveyard to our hand. Shoreline Looter attacks and loots. Traveling Botanist gets tapped and checks the top of our deck for a land, occasionally hitting one. And finally, of course, Stomp sends Bone Crusher Giant on an adventure. All of these cards replace themselves in one way or another. They give us another action to take later in the game, which makes them all card advantage to me. Otak card advantage, by the way. I often see these deck building templates that recommend like 10 to 12 pieces of card draw, or hear other content creators discuss card draw in a way where it only counts when it draws at least 2 cards. I think this is a limiting approach that makes it difficult to find cards that fit those criteria. If we are only playing 10 pieces of card advantage per deck, and each of them needs to draw multiple cards, then that doesn't leave us with a lot of space for creativity and cool interpretations. By looking at card advantage as a broad category that can encompass all kinds of things, and then committing a much larger portion of our deck to it, we are opening ourselves up to finding more thematic options while also building a deck that's more consistent overall. This principle of open-mindedness to card categories is something I apply to every step of my Commander deck building. Why can't Crackling Counterpart count as a reanimation spell, or Darkstar Ogre as a vampire? The artistic expression and resulting personality of Commander deck building is a big part of what makes it special as a format. In conclusion, card advantage is important in Commander, not just because it makes our deck better, but also because we get to avoid games where we aren't participating, and if we're playing a lot of it, we can play more flavorful options that fit better into our theme and allow us to express ourselves. Thank you very much for watching the video. This is all why I personally highly value Cultivate and Kodama's reach. I've seen people online talk about how Cultivate isn't really that good because it's just a 3-mana rampant growth. And while that is sort of true, that one replacement effect, getting that additional land out of our deck, is a really big deal to me, because that's a land that I now have, that's a resource I have access to, and now, later in the game, 3, 4, 5 turns later, I have more cards in hand, and that means I get to play more Magic. And that's what I care about, right? It's not about winning, it's about the journey, it's about having fun with Commander. It's about Commander as a social game, as a social activity. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys soon. Goodbye.